Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I'm your host, Amanda, and my amazing co host is.
Hello, I'm Meagan.
So, here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered, we are your haven for messy, imperfect, secular, progressive homeschool parents. We're recording this episode at the tail end of Inauguration Week 2025. So, let's be real, most of us are exhausted and stressed, right? There's just no getting around it. We've been binging the news, we're doom scrolling, and, possibly stress eating far more than anyone should. But we're going to take a step back. We're going to put the world on pause. We're going to take a deep breath if we can. Maybe not all of us are at that point where we can actually take a deep breath. And we're going to sink into this conversation for this hour at least.
Yeah, it's been a week, all right? But today is going to be an awesome day at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. So hopefully we can be your refuge for an hour because one of my favorite authors and really just humans is joining us today. Amber O'Neal Johnston is here. Welcome, Amber. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, we're so excited. I have met Amber before in a couple of online presentations and author Q&As and stuff. And Amanda hasn't. So I'm like super excited for Amanda to get to become an Amber groupie by the end of our session today. It's going to be amazing. So if you have not had the pleasure yet, Amber has written a new book called Soul School, which will be our next book club selection. Our book club episodes release on Thursdays. She is an established authority on including diverse voices in traditional curriculum and infusing culture and love for others into an intentional home environment. She shares her observations on education, living books, and world schooling at heritagemom.com. And we'll link her socials in the show notes below because after this hour, I'm pretty much convinced that you're going to want to shrink yourself down and live in her pocket as well. So we will make sure you can connect. After wholeheartedly committing to following a mainstream Charlotte Mason curriculum to homeschool her children, Amber became discouraged when months went by with little mention, if any, of the stories and accomplishments of Black people in her schoolroom. While the literary quality of the books may have been superior, she found that the cultural emptiness she experienced as a schoolgirl was being perpetuated within the walls of her own home. Amber set out to fix that in the most incredible ways that we'll be discussing today. And as a result, she has become a go-to voice on curating every aspect of a culturally rich and inclusive home.
I think it's great. I'm totally here for this, right? So I said I have not met Amber before, but I did have a chance to read Soul School in preparation for this. I did a quick pre-read and then we'll do a deep dive later on. We are here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. We're going to continue our resistance with emphatic calls for diversity and inclusion, right? We are not letting that go. Now, before we get into that, I'm going to say, Amber, we pride ourselves on keeping it real around here. We don't do the shiny influencer thing by pretending to homeschool every day in a sparkly clean house. I moved the bags from behind my left shoulder before we started filming. They're just behind the bed. We don't have our full faces of makeup, though we do try to help the shine and put some lipstick on most of the time. We get to that, not always. But, we just try to keep it real. And so we know that real life for 99.9% of people is daytime pajamas and messy buns. And we're here to embrace that and encourage people to own that. So we try to kick off all of our episodes with a brief recap of our week. And this week, we're going to keep it extra brief, right? Because we want to make sure we maximize our time with you. But if it's cool with you, we'll go ahead and do our recap and then jump into Soul School.
Great.
Perfect. So what do you got going on, Meagan?
Oh, it's been a week. We recorded our last episode. I was in Miami and now I'm in Portugal. So it's been a week. But this was kind of our big push to get to Portugal. So we did last week. I talked about the fact that we were breaking our storage unit down and deciding how everything was getting to, we got rid of almost everything we own, right? But of what was left, how was it getting here? And so we did that. Our check-in at the airport took well over an hour because we had 14 checked bags. And what I spent on baggage fees was no small thing, but it got the last of the things here. And in typical homeschool mom fashion, the number of books that made the final cut to join on the plane was ridiculous, but we did it. They got interspersed into all the bags to make sure we didn't go over the weight limits. But yeah, we're here. I mean, we have internet in our apartment now. I have a Portuguese phone number. Tomorrow I'm opening a bank account. So it's been a busy but amazing week. We're making progress and already enjoying kind of getting settled into our new space. So we won't be here long, having said that, because we are still waiting for our final paperwork to come through. So we have to leave the EU for a little while until that happens. So next week I'll be recording from England, but we're going to hang there for a little bit until our paperwork is done. It's almost done. And then we can come back and truly make this our home. But it's been a good week. How about you, Amanda?
Yeah, we're having an okay week. We're just kind of plugging along. It's been super rainy and cold here. And the days that the heater is on, it's great. The days that we don't have heat, it's been really, really cold. I'm from SoCal. I can't handle this cold. I need a heater. But for the most part, yeah, it's been, not too bad. We actually are going to Greece next week, but we are going from Italy to Greece via London. So we're just going to miss you. But yeah, my Italian friend was like, why are you going to London? I was like, well, that's what was cheapest with Ryanair.
Exactly.
And she's like, but that's so long. And I was like, but it's not. Like, I don't know that like the American perspective of like flying, when we go see my parents, it's at least a 9-hour travel day just to get to them. And so like, oh, well, like 9 hours to get from here to Greece. She's like, but it's like an hour and a half stay if you flew out of Bologna. I was like, I know, but I didn't know how to get to Bologna. And so, but
it's like $17 on Ryanair if I fly through London. So
exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what's going on. Okay, so let's get right to it. But I feel like before we do anything else, we need to address the elephant in the room. We are two white ladies, right? Meagan and I were both raising multicultural, multiracial children, but we are still two white women all the same. And I think that as we have this conversation and talk about this, that we need to make sure that we address that like at the top of the show. So there it is. If you're not watching the video and you haven't seen any of our fun, cute infographics, we're white. We acknowledge that. We're not trying to pretend like we're anything else. Okay. So with that out there, I have a pretty general question that I'd like for us to start with, Amber. So you did a great job explaining in your book, and I think it's important for everyone who's listening to be on the same page. Can you explain the concept of windows and mirrors in literature?
I'd love to. So a literary mirror is a book in which your child sees themselves, their community, their family members, people like them reflected. And when I speak about mirrors, a lot of times I use my own family as an example, and a lot of it falls onto us being Black American. And that's a huge thing for my children because it's what they weren't getting very often. But my friends, they have different mirrors in their home. So it could be that a child's being raised in an adoptive family. It could be that they're being raised by a grandparent. It could be that they see the world differently. Maybe they show up in the world differently physically, or they have differing abilities. Maybe, Meagan said her child has a service dog. If her child reads a book about another kid with a service dog, eureka. I mean, there's going to be a connection there. There's going to be a spark of excitement and a feeling inside that says somebody else thought that parts of my story were important enough to write. And so that's the idea of a literary mirror. You can see parts of yourself. A literary window is a book where you can kind of look through the window and learn about the way someone else lives. Someone who's different from you in some way. They could look different. They could have a different culture or ethnicity, a different geography, a different living situation. Like maybe they live in an apartment in a city and you've only lived in a rural, farmland on acres of land. Those are two very different existences that happen all the time within any country, within a lot of countries. And those children may not know about how the other child lives. That's just one example. And windows are very important because in a lot of cases, we can't always expose our children on a regular basis to every different type of person, but through books we can. And they can learn empathy. They can learn just knowledge and understanding to prevent ignorance. They can even develop friendly feelings toward a group of people that maybe they had heard incorrect stereotypes about in other ways. And they also can see all the similarities they have with someone who's different. And I think that's just as important as being able to witness the differences. And then there's another concept that goes even further. It talks about sliding glass doors. And these are like windows, but the story becomes so real to the child that it's like they opened the sliding glass door and they were able to walk into the story and to literally see themselves as part of this world or part of this situation or interacting with the people in the story.
I love that.
That's fantastic. I felt that way about books and I never knew there was a term for it. So now I love that. That's so awesome.
It's so funny to me because, of course, anytime you talk about anything related to diverse reading or books, there are always going to be these naysayers. And they're like, oh, mirrors and windows, that's just not a good concept. And this, that, and the other. And I do not think people should read mirrors and windows. And it always makes me chuckle because I'm like, you do realize every book in the world is a mirror or window, and probably both. It's a marketing term, folks, to help us wrap our minds around it. But you can't say, don't read mirrors and windows. It's not a special list of like covert underground books. Or it's just all books are mirrors, windows. I find that funny when I hear people will say it.
And typically those people are not listening to our podcast because we lost them 10 minutes ago with the intro. So we're A-okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so the tagline for Soul School is taking kids on a joy-filled journey through the heart of American Black culture. And when I read that, I thought about the ways that ideas come to me. And my brain, as Amanda will tell you, works in really wacky ways. It's kind of like a pinball machine on steroids or speed or something else, not quite sure. So I thought about the ways that ideas kind of come to me in fragments, and then eventually they kind of congeal into something. And there's this cartoonish light bulb moment where I'm like, now I know what I'm doing and now I can go forward. So I was curious, you've already written one book, which we'll talk about more in a few minutes, but did this book come to you in ideas over time? Like, what did that creative process look like when you decided to write Soul School?
Okay, so I was first inspired by this book called Shop Class as Soulcraft. And it's written by this guy. He's a PhD academic, but also had a motorcycle shop. And he talks about this idea of working with our hands and how we really tend to disrespect that type of work. And that's where the whole idea of shop class, when he talks about it as soul craft, of like what it does for our lives. And I was really kind of into this idea of work that touches you and your soul. And for me, I think in books. And so it made me consider how, like in the homeschool world, a lot of times we can be literary snobs and we're like, oh, but that's not hot British literature. And it's not an official classic on the approved list. Therefore, we cannot read this with our children. And I thought to myself, well, but if I read this book and it brings my children, it touches their souls, it brings them alive, it gives them life, why wouldn't that be a superb book to include in my home? And so that idea of books that touch your soul came about. And then, of course, as a Black American mom, I'm like, those books got soul. And so the idea of Soul School came about. And so it's like a little play on words. And I wanted something, I wanted to create what I never had. I think that's where I am in my homeschooling journey. I've been at this for years. My two oldest are teens now, and I've been homeschooling them from the beginning. And, I'm closer to the end than I am to the beginning of our homeschooling journey. And I'm at a place of wanting to give back and to drop gifts into the laps of other moms. And I want to say, I'm sorry that you're struggling so much with this. I did too. And there was no one to help. And I want to know if you'll let me, if I could help you. And so that was kind of the idea behind it.
I love the generosity of that. It's so beautiful because I tend to look at big systemic problems and think that's way too big to fix, but I'm going to take care of my own, which is the complete opposite and not nearly as generous as what you just said, right? And I'm going to make sure my kids are good because that ship is too big to turn, right? It's just too much. And so I will focus inward. And you've done the exact opposite. And that's so beautiful.
Yeah, I think it could go either way. I mean, I do still feel that way. I mean, even when the crazy stuff's going in and then they're talking about this with schools and history curriculum, and I was like, oh, my kid's gonna be good. You get me? But I do feel like I'm already doing all of this work, and that part of what has helped silence so many of these books is that the moms all have to, or parents, it's not always moms, the parents always have to dig so deeply and work so hard to pull these resources out. And I would say, we're busy and don't always have time for that. Or if I was, using my bilingual language skills, I'd be like, ain't nobody got time for that. And so, could I help by sharing the work that I've already done for my own kids? So it's a little bit of both.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. I still say it's great. Like, I'm thinking if I had just tracked any of the hundreds of books that I pulled together, right? Like we try really hard for a very diverse bookshelf in our home. And I'm very fortunate because my kiddo is ravenous when it comes to books. So it's not an exaggeration to say that he reads at least 300 to 500 books a year. We have no problem really getting through tons of books. And I spend a lot of time pulling from different reading lists and looking up, what's HRC recommending this year and what's this book list recommending and that kind of thing. And it's great for my kiddo, right? If I had taken the time and put the effort into making that a resource for other people, it would have been awesome, but I didn't because I'm not that altruistic. So thank you for doing it and putting all of that work and effort in. So I have an observation and a question rolled up in that. So the two parts of the book of Soul School, they're really quite different. It's broken down into part 1 and part 2, but they do definitely complement each other. So the first part feels almost like an educational resource, kind of like a Sparks Notes or 101 course on Black American culture. And then the second half is just tons of books that show instead of tell, right? Like these stories where like you actually see it instead of just kind of being lectured about what it might look like in practice. Is that what you set out to create, or did it kind of happen as you were creating it?
It kind of happened while I was creating it. So my vision was for part 2 of the book, which are these highly curated, annotated book lists. We're rich with things to talk about and things to do. And it was very important to me to explain to parents and teachers why I picked these books. I get so tired, like I Google a book list and I'm looking for someone with expertise to give me ideas in this area. And then I just get this article with like 25 list of books with links to their Amazon affiliate. It's like, okay, well, did you read these books? Why did you choose these books? What's important about it? Because I can follow along with you, but I don't know. I'm not learning from this. It's not helping me create lists because I don't even know why you put these on there. So that was an important part. And then also this idea of when I looked at a lot of book lists, sometimes I look at it and it'll be a book that everyone in the homeschooling world loves. And I'll read it alone or with my kids. And I'm just like, I don't get it. Like, who cares? Like, I'm just, is it like the Emperor's New Clothing? I mean, it's okay, but what's so special about this book? But no one ever said. They just keep putting it on the book list. And like, if you're learned, you'll read this. But why? And so I really did not want to have a book list that did not give people the why. So that's that part. Then I started thinking, well, the whole, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, or you teach a man a fish, and I wanted to say, how can I show parents that you don't have to only rely on this list, but I can show you what I look for in general about our culture that I like to see show up in young people's literature so that you can look for those same types of things for my culture, sure, but maybe for your own. And so I kind of wanted Soul School to be translatable into cultures beyond Black American culture, because if you see that I'm looking at food and colloquialisms and I'm looking at geography and history, I'm looking for different genres, and you can start to see how you could create a similar type of list in your own family context. That's where part one came.
I love that. And I just have to say, for anyone who's listening, I have an 11-year-old. He's a bit of a history buff, and I wouldn't censor his reading too much, but I feel 100% confident once I have my own copy of Soul School, he's going to be getting that. It's going to be put right in his hands. And like, you need to read this, at least part one, and then we'll get to part two together. But like, you should absolutely read this. It was full of great information. So if you're listening and wondering, totally appropriate to give your kiddo that book to read and get some ideas from there before you dive into to really looking at the other books that are recommended.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even letting him go through part two, maybe also in sequencing what he wants to read first. I'm a huge fan of, and I know you do this, but I'm saying for anybody who's listening, I'm a huge fan of autonomy of reading, letting kids choose their books. It's a great way to get buy-in with reading. And so if you go, here's some great things, like read through there and see if anything catches your interest, and maybe pull up. I have a kiddo who picks books also based upon book covers. So maybe look them up also online and look at the covers at the same time. And then, they can kind of sequence what they want to pull out of the second half of the book, which would be pretty cool.
Oh my gosh, one of my jobs is so much like that. And, people will say like, oh, we shouldn't judge a book by its cover. She's like, yeah, I do. And she's unashamed. She would like, if you want me to read your book, you better come with it with the covers.
It's so true. Yeah, he's all about cover art. And I have a book club that I lead. We're doing the A to Z reading challenge this year. And the kids get to choose their own book as long as it starts with the letter of whatever that meeting is. And then they come and summarize their books in various ways, right? So some of them create a movie trailer or they scrapbook it or whatever. And they come and share a little bit about their book that way. And they can do whatever they want, but I give them kind of suggestions in case they're having a dry week or just not quite sure where to start, or maybe they're new to the group. And one of them is reimagine the book cover. Like if you looked at the book cover and went, this wasn't even a good scene in the book, or the girl doesn't look anything like that based upon the author's description, redo the book cover, bring it and tell us why. There's some really cool things that they do in there. So yeah, the book covers are an important thing. It's pretty huge. All right. So as Amanda mentioned, we have kind of a preview copy of Soul School, but we haven't gotten our physical copies yet. So we're super excited for that. But we did read through the preview copy, which is exciting. So I know you talked about this a bit in the book, but I have 3 kids. My kids are 17, 15, and 13. And we are a Jewish family. And I know, especially for my youngest kiddo, I waited way longer to introduce any aspects of history that were going to be heavy or dark for him. I knew immediately that if he heard about some of these things, he would be awake at night worrying, well, what happens if it happens again? And all of this kind of stuff. And immediately, having issues, especially when he started hearing family stories about what his grandparents experienced, what his great grandparents experienced. So I know you touch on it in the book, but I think there's plenty of people who are thinking that they have to wait till a certain age to introduce Black history. And I say Black history in quotes because Black history is part of the world history, right? It's all encompassing, but so many people still kind of separate it out as like it's a February thing, right? But to incorporate those stories all year, do you have any tips for a sensitive kiddo as far as an age? Like, what do you suggest? How do parents start? And part of the reason I ask this is I know we have plenty of people in our community who are walking a path that they didn't grow up on. Amanda and I didn't grow up in progressive, diverse world. So we're parenting in a way that we didn't experience childhood. And so there's really no roadmap. So if somebody's like, I want to introduce these things, but some of it feels heavy, and how do I do it? And at what age and all of that? Do you have any guidance that you might offer?
Yeah. So I like to focus on people rather than circumstances. So for younger children, I wouldn't launch into a study brutalities of enslavement, for instance. Rather, I would talk about the life of a person, and they were a child and they grew up, and these are the things, this is how they spent their days. And along with their life story, mostly in these cases, like picture books would be where I would spend most of my time. They're going to mention hardships. And they might mention that they weren't allowed to go to the school that they wanted to go to, but here's what they did instead. Because all of those stories have a instead. No one just sits down and gives up. And so we keep moving through the story and we tell about that person's life. And so I think that for younger children, and this is what I did with my kids, they begin to learn about the hard realities of history by the way, right? It's not overtly like just stuffed into their face, but little drops here and there as they learn the stories of people. And it's funny because someone said, so then do you always have to find people who ended with a happy story? And I was like, no, because every story ends well. That's part of, like you're going to be okay. It's part of the message that I have for my children in any of the circumstances they have in life. You're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. And the people that we read about, they ended up being okay. And okay may look different than, you might disagree with me and say like, hey, this didn't end up okay. Maybe for them, but what about their children and their grandchildren? Were they okay? And did they become okay because of the suffering or sacrifice of the people that came before them? So I think that in the book, I talk about it's our responsibility to share the pain of the past with our children, but it's equally our responsibility to leave them with hope. And if you can't do both, then don't do either, because we can't just, expose them to the most sensitive parts and then leave them there to fit with that and feel that what's the point of anything then really if this is the world we live in, for instance, or something like that. So it doesn't exactly answer your question. One thing I also want to say is ultimately, to me, each parent is ultimately the expert of their children. And so I may say, these are the guidelines I use in my family, and this is the age when I introduced my children to such and such. You might want to introduce your kids to those things much earlier. You might say, there's no way my kid's just not ready. And I always give deference to the parent in that situation with no questioning, because you know what your kid can hear and can see and can handle. And one last example I'll give is, I won't explain all the differences between all my different kids, but I just want to give 2 examples. My oldest son, you can talk to him about anything and he'll be fine, but he cannot see it visually. So we can talk about, I'll give you an example, the transatlantic slave trade and the details and this and all of that. But the imagery of seeing bodies lined up one on top of each other or smushed into the ship and the coffles and chains around the neck and ankle, he cannot handle it. And so somehow he visual stimuli that is very traumatic is terrifying for him, but talking about it is not. So that's something I have to consider. I have to flip through and look at pictures before I hand him something, and I may read it aloud and he'll be fine, but I can't give it to him with the pictures. I have another child who is like, do not withhold anything from me. Like, she feels it's her right to know the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and she can handle it. She feels that you're offending her when you try to like baby the information. So I give her things differently than I do my other kids. And so I think that even within a single family, it's just like other aspects of homeschooling or family life. You have to know your child and do what's best for them, regardless of what I say or what anybody else tells you is the right thing.
I love that. They are all so different and do not come with manuals. I am an only child, so that quite frankly shocked me because I never had a sibling dynamic. And I thought I had all my kids in under 4 years. And so I thought, well, they're all being raised at the same, like our household is the same. They're all in very much the same environment. And so I thought, well, they'll all be, oh gosh, no, that was the dumbest thing ever. I mean, but I just grew up alone. So that's how it was going to go. But man, they should all come with just like a little like quick start guide. So, but
I want the Encyclopedia Britannica on them. Okay. Like, I don't want a quick start guide. Like, year 1, year 2, year 3.
let's try not to be too selfish. Okay. But then again, part of the fun, even though you screw up a lot along the way, is like figuring those things out at the same time too. But You definitely
I'm
have
not
some
saying
bumps
I'd
in the
read
road
the entire book, but I want the resource, okay?
with a good index.
Right. Yes. Yes. And
Exactly.
probably a definition page in the back.
And I was thinking while you were talking, Amber, I literally, I think, and again, grew up very, very sheltered in a very different environment that I am parenting in, or with a very different approach than I am parenting in a home filled with love, but not a very diverse schooling environment or anything like that. The idea, I only heard the phrase Black joy, I think in the last like 4 years, right? Of this concept of, and I step back and go, why are we only focusing on the darkest parts of certain groups or certain people's histories? Why are we not focusing on the joy that is associated with those? And so that's why I love that you've got joy in your tagline there, right? Is that this is a complete list that shows the multifaceted culture that you're trying to share. And I love that.
No, I totally agree. I remember years ago, I was a part of this like Facebook group. I was just there were thousands of people in there, and they were talking about diverse books for various things. And there was a book that was recommended by someone else, and it was a book. It's called Christmas in the Big House, Christmas in the Quarters. And essentially, it's just talking about the difference between life in the big house and life in the quarters. And there are a few pages where it talks about the enslaved people celebrating. And they had the week off, 1 week a year, and what they were doing. And they had cakewalk and dancing, and there was laughter. And so I love that book. And so when I saw someone recommend it, I was like, oh yeah, I was thinking to myself, I agree with that. And then immediately people pounced on her. And they were like, you know, that book makes light of the plight of enslaved people. And it's, you know, it makes it seem like it wasn't that bad because they were celebrating and smiling and dancing. But I understood what they were saying because I've seen books like that. But this one didn't give that to me. What it gave to me was that you can do whatever you want to me, but at the end of the day, I can choose to have joyful moments. I can sing, you can't take away my voice. I can dance, you can't cut my feet off. You know, like I can still move and choose to spend time in community with whoever happens to be in captivity, if that's where it is, next to me. And you can't take that away from me. It's what I got out of the book. And so it was this idea of Black joy. And I think that, you know, both can be true. And if all of us who have been on this earth long enough know that we have highs and we have lows. And, you know, I remember laughing with my siblings at my dad's funeral. So we're grieving and everything, but there were some funny parts. And we were making memories, you know, we were talking about memories with him and like, oh my gosh, why are we serving dad's least favorite food ever? Well, I mean, like we should have done better or whatever. And we're laughing about that. Are we making fun of the fact that my dad just died? No, we're not. But we're saying even in the midst of our grief, we still see beauty in it. And I think that idea of Black joy is something that Black people have clung to always. And in some ways, I address this in the book, but some people can say, well, what about the joy of my culture? And I'm like, well, joy is not in a finite amount. So I hope your culture has joy too. And if you want to give it a name, you should. And so all the individual things that I talk about Black American culture and soul school, very few of them are ours alone, but it's the recipe and the way that we've mixed it up and the way we manifest it outwardly that makes it unique. So other people have these things too, or have access to these.
I love that. All right. So we will talk more about the layout of Soul School in our book club episodes because I originally, when I was typing my notes for today, had all these notes about how I love the way it's structured. And then I was like, but we have Amber. I can't use this time to talk about that. So we'll talk about that later. But there's a reference in there to the fact that obviously your family has read these books and loved them. And you talked about discussing them over dinner and on road trips and things like that, books that have made you laugh and cry. So there's this guy, I don't even follow him, but his stuff always ends up in my feed. I think it's mostly on X, which I'm not on, but they end up on Instagram and Facebook and wherever else, right? So it's this guy, Jonathan Edward Durham. He posts funny, sarcastic, insightful things all the time. And he has this one that floats around that says, book friends are the best friends because you can be all, read this. It will absolutely crush your soul and tear your beating heart into a million little pieces, and you will literally never recover from it. And they're like, OMG, yes. Right. And so for me, that book is The Nightingale. If you haven't read it, your life is incomplete. But I'm wondering if you would give us like one or two examples from Soul School of the ones, because those are my kind of books, right? I love the ones that you're like trembling when you're done reading because they've been so moving.
That's such a great question. And trying to narrow it down almost killed me. But I'm going to start with a book for younger kids and then one for older kids. So there's a picture book called A Walk in the Wood by Nikki Grimes. And it's illustrated by Jerry Pinkney and his son, Brian Pinkney. So part of it is because of the story. And part of the reason I'm choosing this is the story behind the story. So in this fictional story, this little boy loses his dad. His dad dies. He's so sad. He misses him. But he finds that his dad left him a bit of a treasure. And it has a big red X to lead him through the woods to a certain thing. And so on his journey through the woods by himself, which these are the same woods he used to travel with his dad, he sees all these different trees and flowers and all of these things. And it lifts his spirits, this time in nature, alone out in the woods. And when he gets to the X marks the spot, his dad left him a series of drawings that he had created when he was that age of like woodland animals and little things like that he had never shown his son before. So he gets this gift from his dad, but ultimately you're left to understand that the journey through the woods alone was really the gift that the dad left him, knowing that he needed that he would need that when his dad was no longer there. So that story to me was so incredibly touching, and just
made Amanda cry just talking about it.
And you have to hear the story within the story. Okay, so that alone is a stunning story. But I happen to follow, and I talk about this in Soul School, I follow these authors and illustrators. Like I read about their personal lives and follow them as pillars of the Black community. When I know that Jerry Pinkney and his son Brian Pinkney, they're both illustrators, but don't usually illustrate together. They have very different styles and so on. So it piqued my interest. I was like, I don't have any other book that with both of them illustrating it. And so I looked up the story behind the story. And Gary worked on all these and had all the pencil art done, but then he passed away in 2021 and he hadn't finished illustrating the book. So his son picked up his father's art that he had sketched and finished the art for the book that Nikki Grimes had written. And I was like, if you talk about life imitating art, for that to have happened on this particular book with people who are very prolific and have illustrated so many books, for this story just cathartic had to be for Brian to have his opportunity to bring color, literally, his dad only left pencil sketches, to bring color and to bring his father's art to life when the pictures are demonstrating a story about a boy who lost his father. So anyway, that's one.
Wow.
And for older kids, I would say this book, Copper Sun by Sharon Draper. It's an older novel and it takes place, it's historical fiction. And it in the story, it begins in West Africa, and typically, she was kidnapped, she's put into she becomes enslaved in the United States. And it's basically an incredibly detailed journey of her years to freedom. And what I love about the book is that along the way, she meets people who literally help save her life with a word here where they're not literally one word, but like a good word. I would say like good advice, or what you might call mother wit, folk sayings that kind of help her stay in the here and now and not just give up and shrivel up and die. The other thing I like about it is that she ends up running away with a white girl. And I love how the author made that relationship so delicate and tender, but yet realistic. The times when they don't understand each other, when there's animosity, where there's misunderstanding, but ultimately they chose to cling to the humanity of the other when they each had a lot of reasons to be resentful. The white girl was an indentured servant, and obviously the other girl's enslaved. And just I don't know. I saw a lot of my own relationships with friends in that, and like how we have so many reasons to just go our own ways because it's easier to just kind of stay around people who understand you more deeply. That like we choose to do life together, and sometimes it's ugly, but ultimately it's so just beautiful, even with the ugly parts. And isn't that what I want my kids to know? Like, you have a choice of who you do life with, and you can take the easy road and stay comfortable, or you can put yourself in uncomfortable situations and get gifts that you couldn't get any other way.
I love that. My intention was not to get like a sneak peek of what I should put to the top of my book list, but now that one is there. They both are really, even though the other one is for younger kids. I'm like, oh, that works really well. Now I know exactly where to start, right? I'm a little indecisive, so that was helpful.
Works good.
And you made Amanda cry, so, and me almost. All right. So, my last question for today is if you're listening and you haven't read A Place to Belong, I'll tell you right now, must read. Must read. Okay. We're going to link both titles, Soul School and A Place to Belong, in the show notes. In fact, you'll have like a good 10 days from the time this airs till the time Soul School comes out. You could read A Place to Belong in that gap. So we'll link them both there. So it makes me think like in the summer of 2020, which was a very, very difficult time period in the United States, especially if you're listening from overseas, we had a lot of racial conflict in the United States during that time, more than we typically do. And there was this kind of consistent message coming out that was saying, stop asking your Black friends how to act, how to interact, what to say, what not to say, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. They're tired and they don't have enough spoons to answer your questions. So go educate yourself. And I'm all about that. I'm always looking to learn and I'm always looking to grow, but I always still want to make sure that the resources that I'm leaning on then are reliable, reputable, rock solid resources. So that is what you have in A Place to Belong.
And can I also say, like, this for me goes back to the point you made earlier about like the books that make it on all of the lists, but no one explains to you exactly why it's on the list. There are so many books that are like, well, you have to read this one and this one and this one. And the number of like I want to, like, I love learning things, but a lot of those books I picked them up and I start and I get like a chapter and a half in and I'm like, oh, why is it so hard to read? Like, it's important. Why is it so hard to read? You put it down and then like a few months later, you pick it back up and you're like, all right, I'm going to do it again. And you get like another chapter in and like, oh, like, it's like when you find a good resource, right? Like a resource that's accessible and teaches, but is accessible, right? I just feel like there's so many things these days, especially for adults and young adults in that kind of, if you're willing to read the middle grades book, almost all of the books have got the middle grades version, but you're not getting everything that you need out of the middle grades version.
I agree. I mean, I read A Place to Belong in the book club that Amanda and I met in, but for whatever reason, Amanda wasn't at that book. Like you must have been traveling or something in off time zone and you didn't. And so we have a mutual friend and I was trying so hard to remember her exact quote, but basically the synopsis of it was that in the book, Amber provides the education that we are seeking in those situations, but in the most sincere, detailed, and loving way that you could possibly imagine. And our mutual friend kind of made reference to the fact, I forget her exact wording, but it was like more than we deserved, right? That it was so welcoming and so inviting. And it was so beautiful the way she worded it. So I would say, Amber, if somebody's going to buy the two books, right, they complement one another. But what would people expect to learn from one versus the other potentially if they're like, my to be read list is 50 books deep, if they're lucky, right? Mine's like, what are the differences from your perspective as an author when you set out to write these as far as like, this is my goal in this book and this is my goal in this book?
So A Place to Belong is part guide, part manifesto. And my goal there is all that I would say to you if we lived next door to each other and could sneak away for a cup of tea every Saturday morning for like the next 6 months. And just like my story, kind of my origin story, what it's like to mother my kids, what's making life hard right now, where we find sources of joy, what I wish you knew, what I wish I could tell you, but maybe don't always feel comfortable telling you face to face, but I could write it. And I wanted very carefully, this was so hard at first. I was like, what have I done? What have I committed to? But I wanted to write one book for, because I had just some things I want to tell white women or white people. And then I had a different book that I had in my mind for Black folks. And I'm like, always lived in two worlds, right? Maybe not quite Black enough in the Black world growing up, too Black in the white world. And I used to ask my mom, could I have 2 birthday parties? Because it always felt like I had a separation of who I was. W.B. Du Bois referred to part of that as double consciousness as Black Americans. But I was like, this is my book, so I'm just going to be me. And I'm just going to say my piece. And whatever part of the book you feel like is for you, you'll take away that. And if you feel like I'm talking to someone else, then what a gift that you get to listen in on a private conversation. So I would say that book is more general, and it's about living open-handedly in your home and beyond with your children in all sorts of ways. And Soul School is very specific. I drill in on just one of those ways, and that's what you're reading. So that's how they relate to each other.
I love that. And I will say I started the episode by talking about the books that made the final cut to go to Portugal. And I don't think you can quite see it. A Place to Belong. You can see my son's little puppy up there. It's just to the left of puppy. So it made the cut on the flight over. Everything else is going by freight. These are the books that couldn't go by freight. My bookshelves are waiting to be filled. And I will say, if you buy one or both of these books or get them from the library or however you consume them, I learned from Amber ages ago the pressure that publishers put on authors for book reviews. Go review Amber's books, please, right? And not just like good book, like give a good review, because they are under pressure from their publishers to get visibility on Amazon and stuff like that. So wherever you possibly can. And it reminded me that we should really hammer on that in our book clubs too, Amanda. When we like the book, I don't know if John Holt wants us sending people over for reviews. Well, he's dead, so. But Pat Ferenga.
They don't want our reviews. I'm certain of that.
We like, don't review the book.
Like, don't waste your money on this. Like, please don't leave that review. Thank you.
That's what popped into my head earlier when you were saying like the lists that go around of like must read books. Our very first book club when we started the podcast, we picked a John Holt book thinking like this is classic homeschool fodder, right? And neither one of us had read it. And we were like, okay, it was the most ableist garbage. And it had been revised recently. So it wasn't like you could say, oh, it's dated. No, somebody else has.
Yeah, it was a pandemic. Like it was new. Like we were.
Those are the times when you want to see someone stand up for that book. Like let me hear what it is that you took away from this and why you chose it. And we so rarely do that. You know what I mean?
Like, was it the part where he questions if dyslexia is real, and even if it is, that it's not really a big deal and it doesn't affect your learning? Is that part you loved? Did you know we were like, what on earth is this garbage? And so, but hey, sometimes we pre-read them and sometimes we haven't.
So if you read this book, you're going to go leave a nice review. And now don't go anywhere. We're not done yet. Before we wrap up, we want to make sure that we take a minute to remind everyone that we're not just a podcast. So we are a source of community here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. We are going to need to lean on our supportive, like-minded fellow homeschoolers so much, just so much over the next 4 years at least. And who knows how many years it takes to undo a lot of this stuff, right? So come and join us. We understand the need for that really unique. It's a really unique community within homeschooling, and we're doing our best to build it. We host a private Facebook group called Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. If you find us, make sure you answer the questions, please. We can't approve your request if you don't answer the questions. We also host a Patreon with secular vetted monthly unit studies. We make sure we use own voices in those. It's got a lot of great links. It takes a lot of work off of your plate. And then we also include 2 live meetups each month with our Patreon memberships.
And because it's been a rough week and we all need a silver lining of some sorts, that's usually Amanda's jam, silver lining Amanda over there. But we've got a code for our Patreon for this week that will give you 90% off your first month. And our Patreon, we tried to make it as affordable as possible. I mean, they take fees and Apple takes fees. There's like fees galore. So the highest level tier we have is $12 a month. But you can enter code FTP90. And if you're thinking, what were those letters? Because sometimes an F sounds like an S, etc. Right? FTP may or may not stand for fuck the patriarchy, which seemed like a great thing to make our code for this week. So just saying, FTP90 will give you 90% off your first month. So come make some friends. We host a parents' night out. All genders welcome. We've had spouses attend. We love it. Come hang out. It's fun. And then we do a homeschool Q&A advice session. So if you're new to homeschooling or you need help picking an ELA curriculum or you want to learn how to, Amanda's like, I'm in Italy and I'm in Greece. And you're like, how on earth are you doing this? Neither one of us are paying a fortune to travel, right? And neither is Amber. World School is a ton too, right? It's all about airline points and everything else. So if you're trying to figure out how people can afford World Schooling, come talk to us because it's not as expensive as it sounds. So yeah, come and join us. We would love to welcome you to any of our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we typically end our sessions with a mantra, but today we would be so honored if you, Amber, would be willing to close out our session with the 2 final paragraphs of your book.
I would love to. So to the parents of non-Black children, reading this book and using it to share fun and inspiring stories about Black people with your kids is a revolutionary act. You're getting it right. I sense your commitment and salute you. Thank you for diving in and honoring the wonder and spirit of Black American culture. To the parents of Black children, this is my most precious gift to your family. It's for your extraordinary and often overlooked baby, even the ones who have grown taller than you, who need to know that they are our everything and that there's nothing you won't do to show it. There are so many things that were left unsaid on these pages, but I know that you know. May these books plant seeds of confidence, hope, and pure, unadulterated joy in the hearts of your children, one page at a time.
Yeah, if that doesn't just wrap up the book perfectly, I don't know what does. Amber, we cannot thank you enough for joining us today. As we mentioned before, we will soon be reading your books, Soul School, for our Thursday book clubs. We'll be diving into both of the books that you recommend. We'll be looking in Soul School, we'll be looking at the different books you recommend and the ways that you lay out to help caregivers and children get the most out of them. We'll be looking at the immense amount of history that you share in the book and so much more. So for anyone who's wanting to tune in and read along with us, those episodes will begin airing on February 11th, 2025, right after we finish reading our current book for book club, which is The New Menopause, if you're interested in joining us for that.
It's a bit of a shift in topic, but it's all good.
But that's us. We jump all over in book club. So you can always find something to listen to and something to ignore.
From menopause and hot flashes and osteoporosis to Black American culture and Black joy. I'm there. It's gonna be, I'm for it. You can never blame us for being dull, right?
Or predictable. We wouldn't want to be too predictable.
Exactly. I was thinking as we wrap up, I just said not that long ago, we had watched the movie, and I'm terrible with names. I can read an entire novel and not tell you the main character's name. What's the newest Tyler Perry movie that's on Netflix? It's numbers, 666.
Oh, my family watched it. The military.
Yeah, 637, 638, maybe. I don't know.
But I remember when we finished it, it was amazing, right? Amber's looking it up for us. I can tell it's going to be good.
688.
Okay. Thought there was another word in there, right? And I remember when we were done being like, why is Tyler Perry teaching me more history than I ever learned in school about Black history? I'm thankful that he is, but it's not okay that Tyler Perry is my sole source for Black history, or my most reliable source, or the loudest voice in my search here for Black history. And so this book is now Tyler Perry level of information. So you must introduce it in your homeschool lives.
I love that.
Well, Amber, thank you so much for joining us today. It was amazing. Can't wait to read our physical copies of Soul School. It's going to be so exciting. And in the meantime, everyone, happy homeschooling. Have an awesome rest of your day.
Yeah, have a
Thank
great
you so
one.
much.